The city, from a distance, looked like a mountain range made of glass and steel, shining under the sun. And in the very heart of it, standing on a piece of land that was worth more than a whole town, was the Sterling Mansion. It wasn't a home that felt lived in. It was more like a beautiful museum, a showpiece. Every piece of furniture was placed perfectly. Every painting was a famous original. And the silence was so deep you could almost hear it. This was the world of Lucas Sterling. Lucas was the only son of Alastair Sterling, a man whose name was a synonym for money and power. If you saw Lucas in a magazine, you would see a young man with a bright, easy smile, dressed in clothes that cost more than a car. He was always at a charity event, or cutting a ribbon, or smiling next to his father. People who didn't know him thought he had the most perfect life anyone could dream of. They saw the private jets, the luxury cars, the endless parties. But the man in the magazine was just a painting. The real Lucas felt like a ghost in his own huge house. The walls, though decorated with priceless art, felt like they were closing in on him. The high ceilings made his lonely footsteps echo louder. He was like a bird in a golden cage, where the bars were his father's expectations and the heavy weight of the family name. His father, Alastair, was a man made of stone and ambition. He saw Lucas not as a son, but as the next chapter in the Sterling story. A story that was only about building more wealth and power. Their conversations were like business meetings, cold and to the point. There was no warmth, no asking about his day, no fatherly pride. It was all about performance and legacy. The only person who ever asked, "How are you, Lucas?" and truly waited to hear the answer was Maria. Maria was the head housekeeper. She was a woman in her late 50s, with kind eyes that had seen a lot of life and gentle hands that had cared for the Sterling house. Since long before Lucas was born, she wasn't just staff. She was a quiet, steady presence in the whirlwind of his life. She remembered that he liked his toast lightly browned, and that he loved the old, worn-out blue blanket from his childhood, which she secretly kept clean and mended. In the evenings, when the big house felt its most empty, Lucas would often slip into the warm, bright kitchen. The smell of whatever soup Maria was making was a comfort that no expensive perfume could ever match. He would sit at the large wooden table, and they would talk about small, simple things. She would tell him stories about her garden, or ask him about a book he was reading. In those moments, he wasn't the billionaire's son. He was just Lucas. Then came Elena Vance. She entered Lucas's life like a shooting star, brilliant, captivating, and impossible to ignore. She was stunningly beautiful, with a smile that could light up a room and a confidence that commanded attention. She was new to this world of old money, but she learned its rules faster than anyone. She knew what to wear, what to say, and how to charm everyone, especially Alastair Sterling. For Alastair, Elena was the perfect addition. She was ambitious, polished, and from a respectable new money family. She was the final piece that would complete the public image of the perfect Sterling family. For Lucas, who was drowning in loneliness, Elena felt like a rescue boat. Her attention was like a drug. She made him feel seen, interesting, and loved for who he was, not for his last name. Or at least, that is what he believed. Their whirlwind romance was the talk of every high society party. Within a year, during a grand party at the mansion, with hundreds of important guests watching, Lucas got down on one knee. The diamond ring he offered was huge, and it flashed under the lights as Elena, with tears of joy in her eyes, said yes. The crowd cheered. Alastair Sterling, for the first time Lucas could remember, looked genuinely pleased. It was a perfect scene from a fairy tale. But after the engagement, small cracks began to appear in the perfect picture. Maria noticed them first. Her old, observant eyes saw things others missed. She saw how Elena's famous smile would sometimes vanish the moment she thought no one was looking, replaced by a look of cold calculation. She saw how Elena would sometimes look at Lucas not with love, but with a kind of ownership, like he was a valuable painting she had just acquired. Maria also noticed small changes in Lucas. The light in his eyes, which had briefly returned during his courtship with Elena, began to dim again. He seemed more thoughtful and sometimes a little confused. One quiet evening, while Maria was polishing silver in the kitchen, Lucas came in looking troubled. "Maria," he began, his voice low. "Do you know much about Elena's charity, the Bright Future Foundation?" Maria looked up, her polishing cloth slowing. "I have heard of it, yes. It is in all the papers. They help poor children, no? That's what they say," Lucas said, running a hand through his hair. "But I was looking at some of the papers on her desk yesterday. The numbers, they don't seem to add up. The amounts they claim to have spent on supplies and building schools. It seems too high." I asked her about it, just casually. "What did she say?" Maria asked gently. Lucas let out a short, unhappy laugh. "She got very defensive. Very angry, actually. She said I was accusing her of being a thief. She said I didn't trust her. She said her accountants handle everything, and that I should mind my own business. He looked at Maria, his eyes searching for an answer. It just felt like such a strong reaction to a simple question. Maria nodded slowly, her heart feeling heavy. She didn't want to say anything bad about Elena, but her instincts were screaming. Be careful, Lucas, was all she said, her voice soft but full of meaning. Sometimes the clearest water can hide the sharpest rocks. Lucas sighed and nodded, but the worry didn't leave his face. The engagement party was just a week away. A massive event that Elena was planning down to the smallest detail. The pressure was building. The perfect fairy tale was starting to feel like a beautifully wrapped box, with something rotten inside. Lucas felt trapped between his love for the woman he thought Elena was and the growing suspicion that something was very, very wrong. The golden cage was still there, and now it felt like someone was slowly turning the key in the lock. The week leading up to the engagement party was a storm of activity, but it was a quiet, cold kind of storm, the kind that happens inside a person. Lucas felt it. He moved through the grand rooms of the mansion like a man watching a play about his own life. He saw the deliveryman bringing in enormous flower arrangements, all white roses and orchids, exactly as Elena had ordered. He heard the event planners discussing seating charts and music playlist, but it all felt distant, like noise from another room. His mind was stuck on one thing: the charity, the Bright Future Foundation. He couldn't let it go. The numbers he had seen on that paper in Elena's office kept circling in his head. A charge for building materials that was 10 times what it should be. A receipt for food supplies that could have fed a small country. He had tried to push the thoughts away, telling himself he was being paranoid, that he was wrong to doubt the woman he was going to marry. But a small, stubborn voice inside him, a voice that sounded a lot like Maria's gentle warning, insisted that he look closer. So, late one night, when the house was asleep, he did something he never thought he would do. He went into Elena's private study, a small, elegant room she used for her work. His heart was pounding, feeling like a thief in his own home. He turned on her computer. She used a simple password, his own birthday. The ease of it made his stomach clench. What he found in the hidden folders on that computer stole the air from his lungs. It wasn't just a few messed up numbers. It was a whole secret world of lies. He saw fake invoices, forged signatures, and bank transfers that moved money from the charity's account into shell companies, and then, finally, into private accounts that he knew belonged to Elena. She hadn't just made a few mistakes. She had built a whole system to steal from children. The amounts were staggering, enough to build not one, but several schools. The woman he loved, the woman he was about to stand in front of hundreds of people and promise his life to, was a con artist. The next day, the day of the party, the sky turned dark by the afternoon. Thick, heavy clouds rolled in, and a deep rumble of thunder echoed in the distance. The air felt thick and electric. Inside the mansion, the final preparations were frantic. Staff rushed around, placing the last of the crystal glasses. The smell of expensive food filled the air. Lucas stood by the large window in the main hall, watching the first heavy drops of rain hit the glass. He felt sick. He had to confront her. He couldn't go through with the party, with the engagement, knowing what he knew. He found Elena in her dressing room. She was a vision, wearing a stunning, silvery gown, her hair and makeup perfect. She was looking at her reflection, a satisfied smile on her face, not seeing the man falling apart behind her. Elena, we need to talk, Lucas said, his voice tight. Not now, Lucas, she said, without turning around, carefully adjusting a diamond earring. The guests will be here in an hour. Can you believe the weather? I told the planners we should have had a tent. This can't wait, he insisted. Stepping into the room, he closed the door softly. It's about the charity, the Bright Future Foundation. For a split second, he saw it. A flicker of something hard and cold in her eyes in the mirror. Then it was gone, replaced by sweet confusion. The charity? What about it? This is a strange time to talk about my charity work, my love. I saw the files on your computer. Elena, Lucas said, his voice dropping. He was trying to stay calm, but the hurt was bubbling up. I saw the fake companies, the bank transfers. You've been stealing from it. For years? Elena turned around slowly. The sweet, confused look melted away like ice in the sun. Her face became a mask of cold anger. You went through my private computer, she hissed. That's what you're worried about? Lucas asked, his voice rising in disbelief. Elena, you stole money meant for children. How could you do that? Why? She snapped, her eyes flashing. Why, for this? She gestured wildly around the opulent room. For this life. Do you think this is free? The dresses, the parties, the image. Your father expects a certain kind of wife for you. I had to become her. My family's money is nothing compared to yours. It was never enough. The charity was easy. People are so happy to give to a good cause, especially when a pretty face is asking. Lucas stared at her, truly seeing her for the first time. The charm, the beauty, it was all a costume. Underneath was someone hollow and greedy. It's over, Elena, he said, his voice flat and final. The engagement, everything. I'm calling my father. Then I'm calling the police. The words the police changed everything. The anger in Elena's eyes turned into pure, raw panic. She saw her whole world, the money, the status, the future she had killed for crashing down around her. And in that panic, something inside her snapped. You think you can just throw me away? She screamed. After everything I've done to get here. She grabbed the closest thing to her, a heavy, crystal decanter that sat on her dressing table. It was a beautiful object, meant for holding expensive liquor. Without another word, with a fury that was terrifying to see, she swung it at his head. Lucas, stunned by her sudden violence, didn't have time to react. The heavy crystal connected with his temple with a sickening thud. His world exploded into a flash of white light, and then everything went black and silent. He crumpled to the floor, motionless. For a moment, Elena just stood there, breathing heavily, the decanter still in her hand. The storm outside was raging now, wind and rain lashing against the windows. She looked down at Lucas, lying on the expensive rug. She thought he was dead. A fresh wave of terror washed over her. She had just killed the billionaire's son. Her life was over. But then, her survival instincts, sharp and ruthless, took over. This was a problem she could fix. She had to make him disappear. Her mind raced. The staff had all left to get ready for the party. Only Maria was in her cottage out back, and she would never come to the main house in the storm. An idea, a horrible, brutal idea, formed in her mind. The gardens. In a far corner, near the old oak trees, a large pile of fresh soil had been delivered for a new landscaping project. The rain was pouring down. It would wash away any traces. She dragged his unconscious body. It was heavy, terribly heavy, but her fear and adrenaline gave her a strange strength. She pulled him through the quiet mansion, out a side door, and into the punishing storm. The wind whipped her hair and the rain soaked her beautiful gown instantly, but she didn't care. She dragged him across the muddy lawn towards the dark, waiting pile of earth. She used a shovel that had been left nearby, and with frantic, desperate energy, she started to dig. The rain turned the soil to thick, clinging mud. It was a shallow grave, just deep enough to hide him. She rolled his body into the hole, and then started pushing the wet, heavy soil back on top of him, covering him, hiding her terrible secret. When it was done, she stood there for a moment in the howling wind, her chest heaving, covered in mud from head to toe. Then, she turned and ran back to the house. She had a story to create. She was now the heartbroken fiancée, whose beloved had mysteriously disappeared just before their engagement party. It was a desperate, crazy plan, but in her panicked mind, it was the only way out. The storm, she thought, had hidden everything. But she was wrong. The storm had hidden her crime, but it would also help reveal it. Esther's back in her small, warm cottage. Maria was trying to read a book, but she couldn't concentrate. The storm was frightening. The wind screamed like a living thing, rattling her windows. Rain hammered on the roof so hard it sounded like stones. Every few minutes, the whole sky would light up with a flash of lightning, followed by a deep, booming thunder that shook the very ground. But it wasn't just the storm that was making her uneasy. It was a feeling in her heart, a deep, nagging worry that had been growing all evening. She had seen Lucas earlier, and he had looked so troubled, so heavy with thought. And she had heard, or thought she had heard, the faint echo of raised voices from the main house before the storm really broke loose. Most of all, she knew her boy. He always came to the kitchen for a cup of tea on nights like this, especially when he was feeling upset. The fact that he hadn't, it felt wrong. She got up and paced around her small living room. You are just a silly old woman, she told herself. He is a grown man. He is probably just busy with his fiancée before the big party, but the feeling wouldn't go away. It sat in her stomach like a cold stone. Then, she heard something else. Or, she thought she did. It was so hard to tell with the wind howling the way it was. It wasn't the thunder. It was shorter, thinner. It sounded like a cry. She froze, listening with her whole body. There it was again. A faint, muffled sound, carried and then torn apart by the wind. It was coming from the direction of the gardens. Her first thought was an animal, maybe a dog or a fox that had been hurt by the storm. Her heart went out to any creature suffering in this weather. She put on her old, thick raincoat and her sturdy boots. She picked up her powerful flashlight, the one she used for checking the property at night. Taking a deep breath, she opened her door and stepped out into the chaos. The wind almost knocked her over. The rain stung her face. It was like walking into a wall of water. She turned on the flashlight, but its beam was swallowed by the thick, slashing rain. She could barely see a few feet in front of her. "Hello?" she shouted, but her voice was lost in the storm. She listened carefully, standing still in the pouring rain, water running down her face. For a moment, there was nothing but the roar of the wind. Then, there it was. A weak, guttural sound. It was the sound of someone trying to shout with no air, of someone choking. It was a human sound. Fear, colder than the rain, shot through her. It was coming from the far end of the garden, near the old oak trees where the new soil had been piled. She started to run, her old legs slipping in the mud, her heart pounding in her chest. She scrambled up the small hill towards the soil pile, her flashlight beam jumping wildly. And that's when she saw it. A patch of the fresh soil looked different. It was disturbed, sunken, and messy, unlike the neat pile the landscapers had left. And there, sticking out of the mud, was something that made her blood run cold. It was a hand. A man's hand, pale and caked with dirt. A scream caught in her throat. She dropped to her knees, the mud soaking through her pants. She shoved the flashlight into the mud so it would stay pointing at the spot, and she began to dig. She dug with her bare hands, clawing at the wet, heavy earth. Her nails filled with dirt, her fingers ached, but she didn't stop. She dug like a mother trying to save her child. "Lucas," she cried out, her voice cracking with terror and effort. "I'm here. I'm here." She dug until she uncovered his face. It was pale and bluish. His lips were parted, and his eyes were closed. Mud was packed in his mouth and nose. For a terrifying second, she thought she was too late. But then, she saw a tiny movement, a faint, shallow breath. A small bubble of air formed and popped in the mud near his nostril. He was alive. "Thank God," she sobbed. "Oh, my boy, thank God." She dug faster now, with a new, frantic energy. She cleared the soil from his chest and his shoulders. She knew she couldn't lift him out by herself. He was too big, and the mud was like glue. So, she did the only thing she could think of. She grabbed him under his arms, planted her feet firmly in the mud, and pulled with all her might. The police officer, a man who had seen many lives, saw the truth in the details. He saw Maria's hands still caked with garden soil, her nails broken and raw from digging. He saw the quiet, steady look in her eyes, so different from Elena's wild panic. He saw the way Lucas looked at Maria with trust and gratitude, and the way he looked at Elena, with a heartbroken finality. "Ma'am," the officer said to Elena, his voice turning formal and careful. "I think we all need to go to the station to sort this out." Alistair Sterling, who had been standing frozen in the doorway, finally moved. He walked past Elena as if she were a piece of furniture. He knelt, stiffly, beside his son. The billionaire, a man who commanded boardrooms, looked lost and small. "Lucas," he said, his voice rough with an emotion no one had ever heard in it before. "Is this true? She did this to you?" Lucas just nodded, too exhausted for more words. That single nod broke through the stone wall Alistair had built around himself for decades. He saw his son not as heir, but as his child who had nearly been taken from him. He looked at Maria, really looked at her, and for the first time, he saw the woman who had been a mother to his boy when he himself had been too busy. The investigation moved quickly after that. It was like a dam had broken. The police found the muddy, silver gown hidden in Elena's closet. They found the crystal decanter, hastily cleaned but with a tiny, almost invisible hairline crack. Most importantly, they took Lucas's statement and accessed Elena's computer. The digital trail was a confession in itself. The fake companies, the forged documents, the money flowing from the charity for children into her secret accounts, it was all there, laid bare. Her motive was clear as day. When Lucas threatened to expose her, her greed had turned to violence. Elena was arrested right there in the main house, her beautiful engagement ring glittering coldly on her finger as the police officer read her rights. The party guest, who had been waiting and whispering in confusion, watched in stunned silence as she was led away, her head bowed. The perfect fairy tale ending in a walk of shame to a police car. The days that followed were quiet, but it was a healing kind of quiet. Lucas recovered physically, the bruise on his head fading day by day. But the deeper wounds took longer. He spent a lot of time sitting in Maria's warm kitchen, not talking much, just being in the presence of someone who cared for him without any conditions. A change had come over the big, cold mansion. Alistair Sterling was a different man. The driven, distant father was gone. He started having actual conversations with his son. He asked him what he wanted to do with his life, what made him happy. He realized that his fortune meant nothing if he had no family to share it with. One evening, Alistair asked to speak with Maria in his study. She went in, thinking he was going to discuss household matters. Instead, he gestured for her to sit in a large leather chair, something he had never done before. "Maria," he began, his voice awkward but sincere. "I have not been a good father. I have not been a good man to you. You have been the most loyal person in this house, and I never saw it." Maria simply nodded, waiting. "You saved my son's life," Alistair said, the words heavy with emotion. "You gave me a second chance I do not deserve. From now on, you are not staff. You are family. This is your home for as long as you wish it to be." He didn't just say it with words. He set up a trust for her, ensuring she would never have to worry about money again. But for Maria, the real gift was not the money. It was the respect. It was seeing the father and son, once so distant, now slowly finding their way to each other. As for Lucas, he found a new purpose. He took over the management of the Bright Future Foundation. He worked with the police and lawyers to recover every single dollar Elena had stolen. He hired new, honest people and made the charity's finances completely open for anyone to see. He visited the children the charity was meant to help, and seeing their smiles finally began to heal the hurt in his own heart. He learned that his real fortune wasn't in his bank account. It was in the love of the woman who had become his true family, and in the second chance with the father who was finally learning how to be one. The story of the billionaire's son and his treacherous fiancée became a sensation in the news for a few weeks, and then it faded away. But inside the Sterling mansion, a new, quieter, and much happier story was just beginning. The golden cage was gone, replaced by a real home, built not on money, but on the simple, powerful truth of a mother's love for her son. It was an impossible struggle. The mud sucked at him, holding him down. Maria pulled until her muscles burned and her back screamed in protest. She slipped and fell into the mud, but she scrambled right back up, her hands finding their grip again. "Please," she grunted, talking to God, to the universe, to herself. "Please." With one final, desperate heave, she felt the mud release him. He slid out of the grave, a dead weight in her arms. She collapsed under him for a moment, gasping for air, the rain washing the mud from his face and hers. Somehow, she found the strength to get back up. She hooked his arm over her shoulders, her small, old frame bending under his weight. Holding onto him with one arm and grabbing the flashlight with the other, she began the long, slow, painful walk back to her cottage. Step by step, she dragged him through the storm, her breath coming in ragged pants, her legs trembling with the effort. She didn't stop. She couldn't stop. She was his only chance. Finally, she reached her door. She managed to push it open and half carried, half dragged him inside, away from the raging storm. She laid him gently on the rug in front of her small sofa, not caring about the mud and water ruining her clean floors. She grabbed blankets and wrapped him up, trying to stop his shivering. She gently, carefully, cleaned the mud from his mouth and nose with a wet cloth, allowing him to breathe properly. His breathing was still shallow, but it was stronger now. He was safe. For now, he was safe. She knelt beside him, holding his cold hand in hers, tears of relief mixing with the rainwater on her face. The storm outside was still raging, but the real danger, she knew, was still out there. And it was inside the big house, as just the warmth of the cottage slowly seeped into Lucas's bones, replacing the deep, terrifying cold of the earth. He coughed, a rough, painful sound that shook his whole body, and his eyes fluttered open. For a moment, he was confused. He saw the familiar, low ceiling of Maria's cottage, the gentle glow of a lamp, and the kind, worried face of the old housekeeper looking down at him. He tried to speak, but only a hoarse whisper came out. His throat was raw, filled with the taste of mud and rain. "Shh, don't try to talk," Maria said softly, holding a cup of warm water to his lips. "Just drink a little. You are safe now." He took a small sip, the water feeling like a miracle in his dry throat. The events of the evening started to come back to him in jagged, horrible pieces. The argument, the numbers on the computer, the look on Elena's face, then the flash of pain, and the darkness. "Elena." He finally managed to croak out, his eyes wide with a mixture of pain and fear. She hit me." Maria nodded, her face grim. "I found you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I heard you. I found you in the garden." The full meaning of her words crashed down on him. He had been in the garden, buried. A shudder so violent racked his body that Maria held him tighter. She was stealing. Lucas whispered, the truth tumbling out like stones. From her own charity. For children. I confronted her. I told her it was over. I said I was going to the police. He looked at Maria, his eyes begging her to understand the horror. She had a decanter. She swung it. "I thought," I thought I was dead. Tears welled in Maria's eyes. She had suspected Elena was greedy and cold, but she never imagined this level of violence. This was pure evil. We must call your father, Maria said firmly. We must call the police. But just as she said the words, the sound of a slamming car door cut through the noise of the storm. From the direction of the main house. Then another. The party guests were arriving. Back in the mansion, Elena had transformed herself. She had washed the mud from her body, changed into a simple, elegant black dress, and fixed her makeup. But no amount of makeup could hide the wild, panic look in her eyes. Her plan was in motion, and it was a desperate one. She met the first guest at the door, her face a perfect mask of confused worry. I don't know where he is, she said, her voice trembling beautifully. We were supposed to meet an hour ago to get ready together. I can't find him anywhere. I've looked all over the house. At first, people were just concerned. They patted her arm, told her not to worry, that he was probably just running late. But as time went on and Lucas didn't appear, the worry in the room grew. The music played to an empty dance floor. The beautiful foods at UNEADEN. Elena moved through the crowd, perfecting her story with each telling. He was so stressed about the speech, she told a group of his father's friends. I'm so worried he just needed some air. But inside, her mind was racing. She had gone back to the grave after changing, her heart pounding with a sick fear. And she had seen at the empty hole, the signs of digging, the footprints leading towards Maria's cottage. The old woman had ruined everything. A new, even more terrible plan began to form in her mind. She had to get ahead of the story. She had to become the victim. She found Alistair Sterling, who was growing impatient, his face like thunder. Father, she said, using the title he preferred, her voice a dramatic whisper. I'm so scared. I think something terrible has happened. Alistair looked at her, his businessman's eyes missing nothing. What are you talking about, girl? I saw Maria, the housekeeper, Elena said, letting a tear roll down her cheek. Earlier, before the storm, she was in Lucas's office, and they were arguing. She looked angry. And now Lucas is gone. And I saw her just a little while ago, coming from the gardens, and she was covered in mud. She let the implication hang in the air. Alistair Sterling's eyes narrowed. An employee turning on the family. It was a believable betrayal in his world. Without another word, he pulled out his phone and called the police. Minutes later, the peaceful cottage was shattered by the sudden, blinding glare of police car lights flashing through the windows, and the sharp knock on the door. Maria's heart jumped into her throat. She looked at Lucas, who was now sitting up, his face pale, but his eyes clear. It's her, he said, his voice stronger now, filled with a cold certainty. She's telling them her story. Maria stood up, her back straight. She opened the door to find 2 police officers and a furious Alistair Sterling standing in the rain. Where is my son? Alistair demanded, pushing past the officers. His eyes fell on Lucas, wrapped in a blanket. Mud still caked in his hair and on his clothes, a large, angry bruise forming on his temple. For a moment, the powerful billionaire was speechless. Elena, who had followed them, pushed her way forward. She pointed a shaking finger at Maria, her performance perfect. She did it. She attacked him. I saw her. She's kidnapped him. The older police officer, a calm man with a tired face, looked from the sobbing, accusing fiancé to the old woman standing calmly by the fire, and then to the bruised and battered young man on the floor. Sir, the officer said, addressing Lucas, can you tell us what happened? Lucas looked at Elena, at the woman he had loved, who was now putting on this disgusting show. He saw the lie in her eyes, and all the hurt and betrayal turned into a solid, unshakable truth. He looked at the police officer, and then directly at his father. She's lying, Lucas said, his voice clear and firm in the small room. Elena is the one who attacked me. She hit me with a crystal decanter in her dressing room. When I woke up, I was buried in a hole in the garden. Maria saved my life. She dug me out with her own hands. The silence in the cottage was absolute. You could hear the rain falling outside. Elena's face went from a mask of tragedy to one of pure, open shock. Her plan had collapsed in an instant. He's confused. She screamed, her voice cracking. The head injury. He doesn't know what he's saying. But it was too late. The truth was out. The officer looked at Maria's muddy, torn hands. He looked at Lucas's bruised head and his soiled clothes. He looked at the perfectly clean, hysterical fiancé. The pieces were not fitting her story. They were fitting his. The real storm, Lucas realized, was just beginning. But now, he was no longer in it alone. The small cottage, once a place of quiet safety, was now the center of a roaring storm. The police officer's calm question hung in the air, and Lucas's clear, firm answer had changed everything. For a single second, there was only the sound of the rain. Then, Elena's performance shattered. The tears of a worried fiancé vanished, replaced by a raw, desperate anger. "He's lying," she shrieked, her voice like breaking glass. "Can't you see he's hurt? He doesn't know what he's saying. That old woman has poisoned his mind." But no one was looking at her anymore. All eyes were on Lucas, on the ugly bruise blooming on his temple, on the mud that was not just on his clothes, but ground into his skin, a horrifying proof of his story.